Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the North Fork of the Shoshone River, and yes, we have been here in prior episodes. It is just east of Yellowstone National Park boundaries on the Wyoming side. In the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, you may see plenty of mule deer, elk, and moose roaming the forests of pine, fir, spruce, and aspen. You might see a coyote flit through the sagebrush, or a wolf, cougar, or black bear with a recent kill if you are lucky. But of all the wonders of this area, let's hope you don't run in a grizzly bear like Tev Kelley did. On October 6, 2017, 32-year-old Tev Kelley was rifle hunting elk with his 34-year-old hunting partner, Scott Smith. They had been planning on this fall's elk hunt for some time and spent time brushing up on their skills by going to shooting ranges. They knew that success in elk hunting depends on shot placement in any conditions, no matter the wind, cold, or energy levels. Tev was an experienced hunter and professional hunting guide who enjoyed being as far back in the wilderness on his hunts as he could reasonably go. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, but only weighed 150 pounds. He was lanky and wiry built, but the best hunters frequently are. They can get up the hills easier with their long legs and don't have to move a lot of weight either. Now, Tev had been charged by bears in the past. In fact, in 2016, he was charged 2 times that hunting season, on the same day. The year prior to that, Tev was also charged by a bear. For anyone who believes in the odds of any given occurrence, you might tend to believe that Tev's luck was about to run out. Well, not quite yet. Scott had actually drawn the controlled hunt tag for the hunting unit, and Tev decided to tag along for the fun. They rose before sunrise and departed camp on that Friday morning, hoping to find a bull elk of satisfactory size. Tev and Scott were glassing for elk on the day in question. If you've never hunted, that means that they were searching with binoculars or spotting scopes for animals located on adjacent ridges. This method of hunting gives the hunters a chance to see the animal they are pursuing and plan a route to stalk it. The men hiked the steep trails into the high country as the wind howled. They had continually located elk from afar, only to watch them slip away, further into higher and steeper elevations. As the wind forced the hunters into a slouching resistance, it also masked their scent from animals near them. Given the steepness of the terrain, they would appreciate any advantage they could gain. Now Tev didn't pack bear spray with him on hunts. He was simply unconvinced it would work in all situations, and given today was very windy, he was right on the money. Bear spray would have only been diluted in the gusts of 25 to 30 miles an hour, and he may have been completely defenseless afterward, with its contents being exhausted. The only thing apart from his rifle that he packed would be his 1911 .45 caliber super semi-automatic pistol. It has long been the favorite sidearm of many a military man for about 100 years, and is still the pinnacle in terms of power and performance. The pair managed to climb high enough that they had a great angle on a large bull elk. Scott leveled his rifle and took aim from 327 yards at the bull's right shoulder. With a slow squeeze of the trigger, the report of the rifle echoed down the valley as the bull tumbled and then rested down the hill a short distance. The men celebrated upon seeing the bull collapse, knowing their hard work had paid off with a successful harvest. It took a while, but they made their way to the carcass of the bull and knew that this was where the work begins. They placed their backpack and rifles uphill from the bull's carcass to prevent them from being bloodied during the gutting of the bull. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with hunting, gutting an animal is when you cut a large incision from the animal's throat area through its rib cage and abdomen and ending at its anus. Next, the windpipe is gripped and pulled from the animal's body. As the windpipe is pulled, it removes the animal's lungs and esophagus, which pulls the entrails of the gut along with it. By the time a hunter is done removing the guts of a large elk, the remaining carcass is usually quartered for easier packing and retrieval. Scott and Tev knew that the carcass weight of a bull elk would be at least 250 pounds if they removed the bones and took only the meat. That would be 2 trips to the carcass for each of them, and returning with about 60 pounds of meat for each man, each time. An alternative is to leave the bone in the quarter of the elk, which will take less time, as a quarter can be cut with a bone saw in only a few minutes. If each round trip took them 3 hours, they would have the head, hide, and meat out in the better part of a day. Spending time on the carcass cutting meat away from the bones would mean spending more time in the territory of a very smart and hungry predator. The approach to where the bull carcass was open and clear for 200 yards in each direction. The bull had died in an area similar to a small box canyon. The men had nowhere to go in the event of a problem. While the men gutted the bull elk, they discussed the need to suspend the rest of the carcass by rope from a tree. Even without the bones in the carcass, it would take them 2 trips to pack it out, and leaving the bones in the carcass would make roping it up into a tree easier and take less time. This is a common-sense practice many hunters use, as it makes it harder for bears to claim the meat as their own food cache. As the men were bent over the bull's carcass, an odd-sounding snap broke the silence behind them. They had just been looking around the carcass, planning everything out a few moments before, and hadn't seen anything alarming. Tev turned around to see what the source of the snap was, and that is when everything went into slow motion. He heard himself yelling, "Bear, bear, bear," and watched as a huge grizzly bear leapt over a deadfall log and bounded the short distance toward him and Scott. For some reason, each of the hunters moved in a different direction, confusing the bear momentarily. It paused for a second, as if it were deciding between the men who it would attack first. Tev took this brief pause to fire his pistol into a log, and the bear didn't flinch. Tev and Scott knew the bear had been completely aware of what it was running up on. With the cliff behind the men, they had no choice but to stand their ground and see if the grizzly charging them was bluffing. The grizzly immediately started sprinting toward the men once again. Tev could see every detail of the bear. It was fat, and the energy from each bound rippled through its body as it closed in on the men. Its head and ears were up to take in any information, and it stretched its paws forward with each bound, coming closer each time. As the bear neared the hunters, it stood up like a lineman in football. Given the bear was now a mere 20 yards away, Tev's next shot was not a warning shot. He aimed a little high on the bear as its head bobbed up and down with each bound toward them. He hoped to hit its head, but after firing his .45 was not positive where his bullet struck, but he knew he had hit the bear. Tev and Scott watched as the bear tumbled at the impact of the bullet. The grizzly rolled down the hill about 10 yards and lay still. Tev thought he had killed it, but after about 10 seconds it regained its feet. He was convinced it was about to renew its attack. He had witnessed how this bear had no fear of humans, and warily watched as the bear staggered in a circle. The grizzly was clearly stunned and severely injured, but still a very potent threat. As soon as it gained its bearings, they watched it stumble back into the forest. Right after firing the initial pistol shot and watching the bear tumble down the mountain, Tev and Scott ran for their rifles. They knew that the now wounded grizzly wouldn't tip his hat and forget about the meat or the men. Tev didn't fire again at the bear because he was unsure of exactly what the law said about killing a grizzly in self-defense. He, for some reason, was under the impression that once the bear was departing, he could no longer consider it a threat. Recent lawsuits and citations of hunters in similar situations blurred through his mind. In his hesitance, he granted a wounded and angry grizzly permission to threaten himself, his hunting partner, and anyone else who may have the misfortune of stumbling upon the bear. With the bear now out of sight, the hunters quickly loaded their first load of elk quarters onto their backs. Before departing, they attempted to hide the rest of the elk meat in a boulder cleft, thinking it may be safe there until they returned. They guessed their packs at about 100 pounds each, and for Tev that was quite a load. Scott weighed about 220 pounds, so he wasn't as burdened by the weight, but 150-pound Tev struggled to keep pace as the men made their way back toward their truck. The bear had left the scene in the same direction the hunters had to travel to return to their truck. The entire hike out was fraught with nerve-wracking glances and worried study of the trail ahead. They arrived at their truck at around 5 p.m. They immediately put the elk quarters they hauled out into the back of their truck and headed back toward Wapiti and the cell service they knew would allow them to call for help. Once in cell service, they reached out to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and reported the incident to the authorities. Game Warden Travis Crane met at Tev's home to review the hunters' stories and decide their next steps. The next day, Tev and his father, Ned, as well as Scott, Game Warden Crane, and biologist Luke Ellsbury hiked back into where the hunters stashed the elk carcass. As they hiked, each of the men yelled and made as much noise as they reasonably could to make sure to avoid surprising any of the area's several grizzlies. As they neared the location, their hearts sank as they observed bear tracks from more than one bear, as well as scat all around the elk carcass. The meat was now missing, which indicated that a grizzly had claimed it and undoubtedly cached it nearby. They realized they were standing in the middle of a bear cache and knew a grizzly would not take kindly to this trespass. The grizzly that had initially charged the hunters was blonde in color. As they scanned the area, searching for the bear that was certainly laying up in watch over its cache, a darker grizzly caught their eye. It was about the same size as the blonde grizzly, estimated at about 400 pounds, but was clearly not the same bear. It didn't have any obvious wounds, which would be a clear indication of being the same bear. This grizzly was not happy to see the 5 men. It chuffed and woofed to let the men know it was there and that they had better leave. It stood in plain sight atop a deadfall pine tree to make sure they had seen it as it glared in their direction. Being very familiar with bears, the men all knew what was going to come next. If the bear didn't run away at the sight of the men, they knew they were in for a fight for their lives. As this darker grizzly charged the men, Ellsbury fired off 2 warning shots in the bear's direction. He was trying to scare the bear, but was concerned at its boldness. As the bear continually made its presence known, the hunters quickly pulled the remains of the elk carcass from the sticks and duff the bear had placed over it. They nervously tied the elk quarters to their backpacks, and the entire party fled the scene in a hurry. Upon arriving at the truck, Tev's hands wouldn't quit shaking as the intensity and danger of the situation overwhelmed him momentarily. He and his father made a video about the incident and posted it to social media to make sure hunters and hikers were aware of the incident. I could find no source indicating either man suffering from anxiety or nightmares following the incident. Wyoming game and fish officers formed a task group to search for the wounded grizzly, but all efforts came up fruitless. The wounded grizzly was never found. Despite being charged by grizzlies, sometimes multiple times in a single hunting season, Tev Kelley refused to let the incident keep him from doing what he loves. Before the week was up, he was out guiding another hunter on an elk hunt in prime grizzly territory. Regarding the incident of the grizzly and the elk hunters, Tev explains he has been within 100 yards of bears more than a dozen times, and he considers them enchanting. However, he does indicate they are less enchanting when they are trying to kill you. He also expressed sadness in knowing there is a wounded grizzly out there. Around the Cody, Wyoming area, grizzlies charging hunters is not uncommon, and incidents tend to peak during hunting season. In the state of Wyoming, there are said to be 600 grizzly bears, with the vast majority living in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem surrounding the park of the same name. Since the beginning of record-keeping regarding grizzly bear attacks in 1967, a total of 23 people have been killed in Montana and Wyoming. That is an average of 1 human death every 2 years due to grizzly bear attacks each year for the last 51 years. Since the year 2010, grizzlies have killed 8 people in Montana and Wyoming combined, with 7 of these fatalities occurring in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think this grizzly was a dinner bell bear that came in upon hearing the report of the hunting rifle? Could bear spray have prevented the injury to the bear? Were you surprised when another grizzly showed up and claimed the elk carcass? I will enjoy reading and replying to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.